He's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with over 26 years of experience.
And he's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief. And together, we're the Brief Brothers, having an ongoing conversation about advertising, briefing, and briefs. And today, marketing. We have Mark Ritson as our special guest. Mark Ritson is a marketing professor, a PhD in marketing, and he'll give us a little bit more of his background. So let's join the conversation with Mark Ritson. Well, Howard, we're back, and we have a very, very special guest today, coming all the way from Tasmania, obviously in Australia, is Professor Mark Ritson. I'm going to let Professor Ritson introduce himself. I've been following Professor Ritson since 2016, I would say. So a good six, 7 years that I've been following. Professor Ritson teaches a couple of mini MBA courses, a mini MBA in marketing and a mini MBA in brand management. I'm an alumnus of both of those courses. So I'm very, very pleased to have someone who, despite the fact that we've never met in person, I feel is a mentor to me, and someone who I've learned a lot from, and I think that our audience will learn a lot from, and that's Professor Mark Ritson. Welcome to the Brief Brothers.
Yeah, welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Henry. And hey, Howard, it's great to be here. Yeah, I'm honored to be here. Should I give you like a 1-minute career background? What would be useful?
You can have 2 minutes for us.
Wow. So yeah, I'm an academic gone bad. I was a PhD in marketing from the UK, a postdoc at Wharton. I started my professing career at the University of Minnesota at the Carlson School. About 25 years ago, and then taught at London Business School as a professor, and then visiting professor at MIT, and then I finished off in Australia. I married an Australian girl and moved down to Melbourne, taught at Melbourne Business School for a long time. And then having said all of that, I'm a huge critic of a huge lover and critic of American business schools. They're where I learned everything from amazing people a long time ago. I fear they've gone off the boil a lot through lack of practice. And so I was always unusual in the sense that I was doing marketing work all the time. I was a marketing professor. And I worked a lot in consulting for a lot of big companies, which would make me quite unusual, which I think is a scandal. And then, as Henry said, about 6 years ago, I launched an online version of my MBA course called the Mini MBA in Marketing, which is just a core marketing course from a good business school, but taught in a bit more of an applied, advanced way. And we've now trained nearly 30,000 marketers around the world in more than 60 countries, and it's growing and it's changing. You know, for a lot of marketers, it changes the way they do things. And it's probably the thing I'm in a later stage of my career. The thing I'm most happy about is it makes a shit ton of money, which is great. But more importantly, perhaps it really is having an impact on practice, which for me is very important. So yeah, that's me. And I live in Tasmania. I have a house in Sydney, but we live in Tasmania. My wife's Tasmanian. If you don't know it, Tasmania is the island to the south of Australia. Okay. As you can see, it's very green and rainy and snowy. We do get snow in Australia down here. And it's been my home for about 15 years. It's probably the most ridiculous place to live if you want to do international marketing consulting until the pandemic came, at which point it was ideal preparation, because we've been socially isolated for 100 years down here. And we had no COVID. We're an island, so the island just shut down. And we live without masks and all of that stuff because we just stopped everyone coming in for a year and a half and lived normally. And it was kind of a brilliant place to be, given how tricky it was for everyone else. So that's me in a nutshell.
That's wonderful. How far are you from the South Pole?
It's a good question. I don't know the actual geographic distance in that terms, Howard, but I do know if you got on a boat, it takes about 2.5 days, because they do that all the time. They monitor Antarctica from here, and they do take planes. But yeah, it's about 2 days on a boat, whatever that translates into.
So not far at all. Wow, that's just awesome. So you said you would did you work at or study at the University of Minnesota at the Carlson School?
That my first job out of grad school was because I did my postdoc at Wharton. I went on the market in the US to get, junior professors go on the market. And one of the places I was offered a job was the University of Minnesota. And I had great friends in Minnesota and spent 2 or 3 summers there hanging out, basically, even though I went to an English university. So, yeah, I spent 4 very happy years at the University of Minnesota teaching marketing. That was my first job.
That just tells me how small the world it is, because I spent 8 years of my career in Minneapolis. And in my first job there was with Carlson Marketing Group.
I know Carlson Marketing Group very well. The oldest direct marketing group in the Midwest, really, right?
Well, it's gone. It shut its doors many years ago. I didn't know that. Oh, yeah.
When did that happen? I mean, I was there sort of mid-90s, right? It was a powerhouse then. So
I was there from 2003 to 2006. They had a major management change at Carlson Marketing itself on the creative side, and it probably shut its doors no later than 2010, maybe.
I did not know that. I mean, that was to understand the Midwestern market. I mean, Minneapolis is a very good advertising town, as you'll know, Howard. And there was a whole bunch of amazing agencies there, but Carlson had a very special role, right? So, and that family were obviously very influential. So, yeah, that's a surprise. Yeah, a great town, a great marketing town.
It is. You didn't want to run into Mr. Carlson Sr., whose first name I forget, because he would pin you.
Kurt.
Yeah, he would pin you against the wall and he'd say, "How much money have you made for me today?"
Yeah. He sponsored obviously the Carlson School, and we had that advice given to us at one point or another. You know what I mean? So,
well, this is a real interesting mix for us. Henry and I usually talk with fellow creatives or fellow strategists, and correct me if I'm wrong, Henry, but I think, Mark, you are our first bona fide PhD and in marketing. So we are doubly, triply delighted to have you here. And I'm sure that Henry's got a whole bunch of questions.
I'm chomping at the bit.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to turn it over to you because I know you took his course, and I'm going to let you lead the questions.
So, Mark, I first became aware of you when I saw a YouTube video. You were addressing the AANA, the Australia's version of the ANA, and the
That's right.
video. The speech you gave was called Marketing Deconstruction, the Death of the Traditional / Digital Divide. And that video, I think, first of all, if you could address, like, I couldn't have been the only person that kind of that had to have been like a huge moment for you, because I think that video within our sphere of communications pretty much went viral. I think part of it is your delivery, obviously. One of the things that I love is that you have a foul mouth, because I have a very foul mouth myself. But beyond that, I'm also a contrarian, and you were saying a lot of things at the time, and this is 2016, that I think caused a lot of people to stop and say, what if this guy's right? So I want you to take me back to that moment. And then I want to talk about like what has changed in the intervening 6 years.
Yeah,
you and in the industry.
I was invited by the AANA to do a series of talks that year. They wanted 3 talks, and the first one I did happened to coincide with a lot of we planned it like a year before, and it came out at the same time. There was a lot of questions about the numbers that were coming out of Facebook and YouTube and everything else. And in Australia in particular, we'd really drunk the Kool-Aid of digital with absolutely no pushback at all. And I attended some conferences in the previous couple of years and spoken at them, where I'd been pretty taken aback by how much bullshit was getting blown out on the stage without any, no one was querying it at all. And I was, prior to this talk, I'd spent a long time talking about how organic social media was a load of bullshit. And that brands, the big one was the Oreo moment, if you remember, where Oreo culture jacked the Super Bowl with their team of 18 marketers and that famous tweet about you can dunk after dark. And it was written up as if they'd had more impact than the Super Bowl advertising, And that patently wasn't true. And I literally think I was the only person in the world that said that this is just bullshit. If you estimate the numbers of how many people were exposed to that tweet outside of the marketing community reading about it in advertising age, it doesn't stack up to a percentage point of the people who watch the ads for, Budweiser on the TV. What are we talking about, And it was so left of field. I think people thought I was having a breakdown or something. It was literally that people couldn't compute how it was possible not to think Oreo were the best. And so we rolled into this double A&A thing where I just, the point I tried to make throughout was I'm not against this stuff. It's just so over bloated, and the criticisms of so-called traditional media are so unfair. We need to rebalance this. And then, so that was the main theme, was just questioning a lot of the numbers, which needed to be questioned and have subsequently been properly questioned. And the other bit that really set me on fire was I didn't understand the distinction between traditional and digital because it was already a nonsense. To this day, I say to people who talk about digital marketing, can you give me an example of a digital marketing tool? And they'll say Instagram or TikTok or whatever. And I go, okay, got it. Can you give me an example of a traditional marketing communications tool? And they'll say outdoor. And I'll say, well, like 70, 80% of outdoor is digitally delivered now, so that doesn't count. They'll say radio, and I'll say, well, more than half of the radio in the UK is downloaded, not broadcast now, so that's kind of digital too. And we go on and on through this thing. They go on newspapers. They go, well, most newspapers, starting with the New York Times, are predominantly digital led. So it doesn't even make sense anymore, this D prefix, And so that's what I was saying back in 2016, and it went down incredibly poorly in Australia. It's very interesting, when you try and say something that most people disagree with. At the time, people just give you shit, right? Later on, you might look a little bit smart, but mostly what you remember is the shit. When the pandemic broke, now that I'm a bit older and more worldly wise, the first thing when we had the pandemic was I knew what the morons would start saying about changing everything in marketing and nothing being the same ever again. So I got ahead of them and did a talk in March of 2020, which was basically ignore all the morons that are about to appear. This is going to be a tough few years, but after it, everything will go and revert back to the mean, which of course is what's happened. And so when you do this, it looks great later on, but at the time you just get laughed at and you get abuse. And a lot of people just said I was I was getting paid by the TV industry, which I definitely wasn't. No one could understand it, and I think it's aged well, as you say, Henry, in the sense that a lot of it has proven to be more accurate. But at the time, yeah, it was like people were just like, what are you on? This is crazy,
So I recently rewatched the whole talk because in preparation for today, because I wanted, because it did, in my mind, in my life, it made a big difference. It changed the way I looked at everything that we were doing in the agency I was at the time. And so the interesting thing to me is if we go back, and it's easy to forget, because things, they do change rapidly, right? In 2016, we still weren't in the environment we're in today, where basically everybody's social media marketing is paid. This was
Right.
at a time, and that's what you were bringing up, and you mentioned the organic portion of it was this idea going around that people wanted to have conversations with brands, and that the brands were going to embed themselves in people's lives, and they were going to be part of this conversation. There was going to be a two-way conversation.
Advertising was dead, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and exactly. And all of that, everything you said was true, which was the average person at the time was like following two brands maybe on Facebook. Most users of a brand weren't following the brand. It wasn't a particularly good way to reach a lot of people and get critical mass. Now, of course, they have to admit, people like Zuckerberg have to admit the fact that they've become like any other medium. It's pay for play. They have a huge audience, and that's valuable to marketers. And getting the ability to pay to be able to talk to those people in an advertising sense, makes sense. But what was going on back then didn't seem to make a lot of sense. And there was a disproportionate amount of energy, budgets, and discussion, which brings me to the next point I wanted to bring up, which was a little bit about how the media covers the industry. And I know that you have a lot to say on, advertising is dead, this is dead, that's dead. And they want to kill everything. The new thing is always the greatest thing. But also you mentioned in the speech, and this is, I'm going to venture into the realm of the controversial a little bit here. I don't have a problem doing that. Howard might flinch. But, there's this uniform reporting of the trade press that happened, and you mentioned it a couple of times, and you said, I don't think that these people have bad motives, but for some reason there's a lot of groupthink in the trade press. And I see now, 6 years later, we see that in the broad general press. Like, we have very pressing issues of the day, and we're not allowed to debate them. We're not allowed to dissect the data. We're not allowed to have contrarian opinions. Otherwise, these big tech giants say, no, you run afoul of our misinformation. And then all of a sudden it's like, who owns the truth? And so I kind of look back at that time capsule, and in our business, it was already happening.
No flinching here, I promise you.
No, and look, I don't think the media is on the payroll of the digital media giants. I think it's that I have this phrase, the pornography of change. The media, and particularly, if you look at Advertising Age is a good example. It's a complete pile of wank, right? I mean, you look at what they cover in that once great title, and it's just shit most of the time. And a lot of it is driven by this absolute obsession with the new and total ignorance of the old. You know what I mean? It's pathetic. I mean, what we're seeing, if you look right now, right? Netflix has discovered cable TV, right? All Netflix is now turning into, after all that hoo-ha about disruption, is running ads at a very impressive CPM, and it's now going to drop its shows on a weekly basis. You know what I mean? It's the same when Zuckerberg launched advertising on Facebook. It was all fighting talk about the end of advertising, as you say, Henry, and about having conversations, and the age of advertising was dead. 10 years later, look where we are. TikTok, we're a different kind of media company. It's completely different. Everyone comes back to the same model. And my frustration with the media that covers marketing and advertising is they don't show enough critical capabilities to pinpoint the bullshit in all of this and actually point out that a lot of it isn't accurate. It's just, I have no problem with Zuckerberg bullshitting about the power of Facebook's advertising. That's what he's meant to do. The problem is the media doesn't critically assess those points, and clients are so scared of being caught out saying things like, actually, radio looks good to me. Outdoor looks pretty good to me. There's no client that would have said that in the climate of the last 5 years, because they're scared shitless of looking outdated and old-fashioned and all the things that will get you fired from your job. And so we saw this sort of progression where people like Gary Vee, who's a splendid fellow, but completely nonsensical on most aspects of marketing and advertising, were given free rein to talk shit and were not critically held accountable by the media that should have held them accountable.
Yep. So to me, there's a couple of things to unpack in what you just said. One is these digital native companies like Amazon and Netflix that use quote unquote traditional advertising to advertise their wares. I think that's hilarious.
Hey, look, Henry, you just pause on that point, right? Not only do they use it, they're the biggest investors in it, right? The companies that were hammering TV advertising spend more on TV advertising than anybody else.
And out of home and all the rest of
it.
Totally. Apple has owned the billboard on I-95, which is a main interstate freeway here that runs right through Miami. Apple has owned a billboard there for like the last 10 years with rotating the newest iPhone, the newest whatever. And, and it's not even a digital board. It's just a big out of home board in a very desirable location. And this is one of the most technologically advanced companies in the world.
But
the
to
other
your
thing,
point, Henry, it's also one of the smartest companies, right? So you take that one single example. What are Apple doing? They want a non-digital billboard because viewability on non-digital billboards is 100%. Not only is it 100%, if you look at the dwell time and the actual fixation time on outdoor fixed advertising, it's around 85%. So you're running an ad that 85% of the people are going to look at. Yeah. Digital doesn't have anything like that, right? For starters, something like 70% of Instagram advertising isn't visible, right? It doesn't appear in a human place, right? So when you start running the proper numbers on this, you start to realize why Apple are doing it, because they want their ads to be seen, and they're a smart company. That's why you would do outdoor, man.
And in this particular case, a lot of the billboard ads that they put up are for, photograph on iPhone, right? So it's beautiful imagery that draws your attention. It's in a jumbo spectacular format that, it really benefits the brand and what you're trying to sell, which is gorgeous photography taken on an iPhone.
Well, the other thing I think is probably true about this particular billboard is that because it's been owned by Apple for so long, that people who commute see it over and over and over again, and they know, first of all, they probably absorb it into their subconscious. So if they don't even see it, they'll drive by it and they'll still see it. One of the things that I came across a post on LinkedIn not long ago. It was a study posted. Les Binet was part of the study that said a cohort of people had electrodes attached to their brain to measure the way their brain waves responded when they saw a new unfamiliar brand versus an old brand that they were very familiar with. And the assumption was going into the studies that the people who would see a recognized old brand, the brain waves would be firing off like crazy because they recognize it, but they wouldn't be firing off because it was a new brand. Guess what? It was the exact opposite. New brands caused people to work harder because they didn't know the brand. They had to say, what, who, what? The old brands had been so embedded into their consciousness that they didn't have to work very hard. And of course, they used the term, building up a brand is a no-brainer. And here was an actual study that demonstrated that. So that's what Apple is doing.
Less friction involved.
Right, less friction.
Yeah, and it ties into one of the greatest pieces of research of all time, Paul Dyson's research, that looked at what were the biggest drivers of advertising effectiveness. And it'll break you to your hearts, but creativity was only number 2. Obviously, you need a great ad, a great creative to make an ad work best. Number 1 is how big is the brand already? Not how much it's spending on the ad itself, but how big is the brand already? It's an 18 times multiplier on effectiveness, hugely bigger than anything else in the list.
Wait a minute.
Partly to your point, Howard, because the ad just slips into existing mental availability and reinforces.
Byron Sharp, there you go.
Yeah.
Mark, and one of the great tragedies, boys, of America, I have to tell you this. I learned so much from America. I went to America in the 90s to learn marketing because Americans were so far ahead. Wharton was mind-boggling. Carlson and companies like that were mind-blowing to me because they were so far ahead. America is a long way behind in marketing and advertising and branding now, a long way behind. And I don't know where you point the finger, but the absence of knowledge of Byron Sharp and Ehrenberg Bass among most American marketers, you guys being an exception, is a stunning omission of someone who's the greatest thinker on branding. I don't agree with everything he and Ehrenberg Bass say, but he has changed the world of marketing, except in America, where they're living in 2004.
Believe me, I know. I work on a couple of Fortune 50 brands that they're stuck in a period of time that I don't know, how to describe it. I work on other brands, particularly an FMCG brands that very much are in tune with it. So. I think it's taken, unfortunately, a while, which I guess kind of leads me to the next thing. And Howard and I always talk about this topic a lot, or not always, but we talk about it a lot, which is training. And I think it goes right up your alley with the mini MBA courses that you're teaching. And that is, that, you know, I started working in advertising, and I've been in the agency side my whole career, 26 years. And I started working, there were still some elements of training. You could sense that there had been, but by 2022, you know, I'm working at one of the largest, if not the largest, holding company in the world, and there really is not a huge amount of training. Like, it's basically you just learn, get thrown into the fire. There's no formalized training. What caused you to and I see this on the client side too. I don't know why, but it seems like a disproportionate amount of the clients that I've had over the 26 years didn't come from a marketing background. They came from some other aspect of the brand or the company, right? Like they came from R&D, or they came from operations or sales, and they get slotted into it, and they don't have like any marketing background. And so my question is, what caused you to start the mini MBA program, and what causes this issue of, you know, having so many people with a marketing job title without a proper marketing educational background?
Well, it's a good question. There's a couple of things, right? So the personal reason was I started having children, and I couldn't get on a plane 3 weeks in every month and travel because my wife wouldn't let me. So I started to think about, frankly, how can I make money, as much money as I was making going to New York and London, without going to New York and London. At the same time, though, as you say, I mean, I'd become increasingly disappointed with an industry like marketing, where I have no problem people coming from sales or operations or digital into marketing. I think that's great. The problem is, A, they came in without any training in what marketing was, and B, it's not that they were worried about that. If anything, they were proud of it. We had all these numbnuts going on Twitter going, I'm proud of not having a marketing degree or a training in marketing, you know, and it comes from, again, unfortunately, the Neil Patels, the Gary V's. You know, you can learn more on you know, those tweets that come out every day from some idiot. You know, I didn't go to business school because I learned everything from YouTube, right? And then what they do then is go on talking about shit, which proves they know nothing. I mean, the classic example of ignorance, which you see, again, 100 times a day, you know, this company was successful without any marketing. No, it wasn't. It was successful without any paid advertising, which is about 5% of marketing.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a topic I definitely want to cover, which is the conflation of advertising with marketing. But we can park that, and yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to it, because it's a function of complete lack of training in marketing, proper training in marketing, right? Advertising is an important part of marketing. It's about 8%. Digital advertising is about 4%, right? Those numbers are, if you understand marketing, are inarguable. But if you're an ignorant idiot that came out of an industry and didn't have the capability or guts to get trained, you're like, well, how can that be, right? So that was part of what was driving me as well, was, God, we just need to train these guys. And the third part was, but I looked at the business school world, where at the top business schools, at the Whartons, at the MITs, at the London business schools, they do have a great training in marketing. But no one's going to spend $100,000 in 2 years to get that training to develop, you know, proper marketing skills. You know, 99% of the people I work with aren't going to be able to do that for whatever reason. So you put all that together, and I became obsessed with this idea that Marketing Week, the magazine I write for in the UK, gets about 600,000 unique visitors a month to its site. I was pretty sure I could convert 1% of them to do my course, which would be an online course. And I was pretty sure I could charge around £1,000, maybe about $1,500 for the course. And then whenever I ran the numbers, it just looked like a good business proposition. And then it's interesting. I'm not an entrepreneur, or I wasn't. I couldn't get anyone to buy into it at all. So I started to feel like I was probably going insane, but we finally launched it. And yeah, it's gone, it's been an amazing success, partly because there's a hole in the market of proper good level quality training. and partly because there are, as you say, there's a shit ton of marketers, honest marketers, who go, I don't know enough about marketing. I've not had a proper training in we're a 100-year-old discipline. And whenever I promote it, you'll always get some dipshit who follows Gary Vee going, I don't need no training. Basketball players, they can, they go straight from high school to the NBA. And there's always some bullshit thing. And I always reply the same way. I go, that's great. Basketball, awesome. Here's what I believe. Training in marketing makes you better at marketing. The end. Yeah. It's an inarguable point.
So a couple of things that, you said that really resonate with me. Number one is my degree. I have a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Florida. I got into advertising as really a second career after I went bust in my first career as an entrepreneur. And I started out, very insecure. I ended up in strategy because I recognized the small agency I was at didn't have really a strategy capability, and it needed it. And so but I felt insecure. So I was trying to teach myself all the time. I was looking for materials. Which books should I be reading? This was before even like YouTube and things like that.
Yeah.
That's how I found Howard. By the way, Howard wrote a book, How to Write an Inspired Creative Brief, and that we became friends after that. Yeah, I brought Howard to the agency to teach a workshop to the people at the agency I was at the time. So I always had this fear that there was something I didn't know that I needed to know, and that was kind of what drove me into your arms after I had become acquainted with you, and when I saw the advertising for the mini MBA, of which I was in the first cohort. And a funny anecdote was, I was debating, because you said it was like £1,000, it was like $1,500, and I was debating back and forth whether I should do it. And finally, in my mind, I said to myself, how much money have you made in this industry over the last 20 years? And I said, a lot of money. And how much money have you invested back in your education?
That's good.
Not a lot. Maybe a few books, maybe some time, but really not anything significant. I said, what's $1,500? So I pulled the trigger. I put my credit card down. I charged everything. And the next day, Britain voted to exit the European Union, and the pound sterling crashed. And if I had waited 2 days, I would have saved about $400.
That's right. No, it's your timing was bad. I mean, it's interesting though, but you're very typical, Henry, in many ways. Of we attract a tiny fraction of the world's marketers. They tend to be quite senior. Most of the average age is 41 on the course, and they have something in common, as you describe it. They're all pretty good at their job, but they all have that confidence gap that says, I think I'm pretty good at this, but I have no idea how to confirm that. And I remember interviewing a woman when we did the research for the positioning on the course, and she's a very senior marketing woman in the UK. And she said, I always have this nightmare about the guy in the back row. So whenever she gave a talk about anything, she imagined some guy in the back row standing up and saying, look, do you have any formal training in marketing? And she'd be like, no, I don't. It's like, well, I don't believe anything you're saying. And it's a complete paranoia, right? And she's a very good marketer. But what we found was when we do when I track the course success or failure each time, one of the 2 or 3 metrics is confidence. Did this course make you more confident in marketing? And people often say, that's a weird thing to track. And I'm like, it is if you don't understand good senior marketers who came from a different industry, who know their stuff. We add more stuff, we connect it all together, but we also go at the end quite correctly. This is the kind of training that you would get at a top business school. There is nothing more expansive or better than this. If you understand this course, you're on. You've got it.
Yeah, they talk about imposter syndrome, right? And I think that's what this kind of, it's like I play a marketer on TV every day, but I'm not really one. And that's that kind of that lack of confidence. But I will say it's not just about confirming stuff that you've learned on the job. Having taken both courses, I definitely learned new things. I found, ways to apply them. For me, being on the agency side, it was really important to understand the client side and what and to see advertising within, and this kind of goes back to the conflation of advertising and marketing, and so like I'm looking at a client's business now, and I can see that, oh, their problem isn't with advertising. Their problem is that they have a pricing problem, or that they don't have the right product mix for what the market is demanding.
That's right.
Which are hugely important, much more important than whether a good product will generally sell itself. The advertising can help, right? But if you're having problems with the other, and I use the old 4P model, but if you're having problems with the other 3Ps, there's nothing good advertising and PR can fix.
But Henry, there you go, Steve. There's a perfect example. We've had 15 years of idiots rewriting the 4Ps, right? There's 8 Ps, there's 6 Ps, there's 7 Qs, there's in one case 44 Ps, right? There's absolutely nothing fucking wrong with the 4 Ps, right? It's a brilliant model of how to handle the tactical part of marketing. Yes, it's 60 years old, but sometimes being 60 years old isn't a bad thing. It signals that it has long-term value. But we as an industry are so keen on reinventing the rules that we don't even know how to apply the original ones. Almost everyone that's written one of these half-assed columns about, it's not about 4 Ps, it's about 25 Ts, doesn't actually understand the 4P concept in the first place. I'll give you a good example. A lot of numbnuts go, you need to add positioning, so there should be 5 Ps. No, you shouldn't. Because the 4 Ps are we're always written as the tactical levers. Positioning's part of strategy. It happens before we get into the Ps. But unless you've been trained in marketing, and most of these guys haven't, they're trying to write a new book of marketing without actually understanding the existing corpus. You make that elementary undergraduate error. If I speak bad French. If I said, look, you know what, I'm going to create a whole new version of French, a new vocabulary in French, right? And okay, I don't really understand French very well, and my pronunciation's shit, and I can't actually write it, and my grammar's wrong. But I'm going to create a new one anyway. People would laugh at me. But we allow people with no formal training or knowledge of the basics of marketing to try and recreate it in a new way. And what they need to do is sit down, shut up, and learn from the 100 years of existing marketing history. The world hasn't changed that much. You get these guys saying, oh, marketing has changed more in the last 12 months than in the last 50 years. Horseshit. If you lived through Marlboro Friday, the evolution of outdoor sales promotions, we've been changing throughout the history of marketing. It's just that you guys don't know your history. You're obsessed with the pornography of change. So, yeah, we have to try and pull these people back. We call it a discipline, but we have no discipline. That's the problem with marketing, right? It's a free-for-all, and it's a free-for-all run by and large by idiots that don't have any experience of the actual thing they're trying to be in charge of.
I was going to... Go ahead.
That's a really interesting observation, Mark. I'm an advertising guy. I'm a former creative, so I have no pretense and no compunction about saying I don't really know anything about marketing. And
that's right. And as we said earlier, Howard, in the pre-talk, right? I don't know much about creative briefing. I don't get involved in advertising too much, right? But I know what I don't know. I know when the agencies turn up, I have no idea what's going on. It's time for me to go, And I get that, but I'm seeing things that trickle into what I do from the marketers who don't know what they don't know. And just one little example is when I go before the pandemic, I used to travel 100,000 miles a year. I'm doing everything virtually now, but I can't tell you how many times I would be working with marketers for major brands that you would recognize, and I would ask them, okay, and we can debate the appropriateness of this phrasing, but I use the term, what is the promise of your brand? Can you summarize that promise of your brand? And they look at me and they say, they're still figuring it out upstairs. They don't know what the brand promise is. And again, unfortunately, what you're describing, So the scandal that many of us have been aware of for a long time, as you say, with very big brands that you would imagine were much better run than they are by very famous CMOs. We have all this horseshit about, what is strategy, overcomplicating strategy. So strategy is only a couple of things, right? First of all, it's getting rid of tactics. You cannot have a Facebook strategy, right? That doesn't actually it's literally a contradiction in terms. Facebook is a tactic. Marketing strategy is about what you as a company, first of all, want to achieve. And it comes down to answering three questions: target, to your point, position, whatever we want to call it, and objectives. And what we've learned more recently from these Better Briefs research surveys, but which we already knew, is the vast majority of big brands don't have a marketing strategy. I'm not saying a good one. I'm not saying a correct one. I'm just saying a strategy in place before they start doing tactics. And that's the level we're at in marketing right now. The basics aren't done well because we're all obsessed with TikTok and all of that shit.
There's too much unspoken in the big companies. Nobody's asking, oh, what is the positioning of this brand? And it's all unspoken. It's the weirdest thing ever. Like we're supposedly working in marketing, and somehow we don't talk about like the big questions. Those three big questions should be tattooed on everybody's forehead in an organization. But it's interesting because as a strategist, I'm like the one that's living in both of those worlds, right? Like I'm in your world. I need to understand your world as a marketer, and I got to understand the creatives world on the advertising side. So that's why I kind of feel this so acutely. The lack of training on both the agency side and on the client side.
But Henry, your point's crucial. It's not that advertising's super important, but there is that moment where we bring in the client strategy via a brief, which is kind of the acid test, where if you can't explain in an hour to a bunch of people who are being paid by you what the fuck you're trying to achieve, that's when the emperor's clothes suddenly disappear. And that's what's been happening. Now, the agencies are too cowardly, probably correctly, to say to the client, you haven't got a fucking clue what you're doing here, have you? This is not, they have never fed that back. That's also another corollary of this, right? But we have this moment where the client can get away with this. I mean, if you take positioning as a great example, right? What's the problem with positioning? The problem with positioning is about 25 years ago, everyone forgot what positioning is. All positioning is the intended brand image. Yeah. I want to be A, B, and C. Let's make the consumer think I'm A, B, and C. We turned it into onions. We turned it into, keyholes. We invented brand value, brand attributes, brand purpose, brand character. We started believing positioning was an end in itself. A PowerPoint deck, a book, for fuck's sake, right? And what we missed was the purpose of positioning, which is this is what I want you in the agency to communicate to my target, right? That's what it means. That's originally its intention. And I don't care what we call it. Business school, we call it positioning. You can call it purpose. You can call it, attribute. You can call it character. It doesn't matter. But the point is, if you've got 17 different concepts and 42 different words for your brand position, no one's ever going to get it, even inside the company. I mean, I worked for a very famous fashion brand in New York once. Very good, nice people, but useless. And the first thing I did with them on the first day was I got beautiful little envelopes and little cards. And when they walked in, because they didn't think there was anything wrong, and the parent company knew there was a lot wrong. And I said, okay, hello, everyone. Hello, nice to meet you all. Let's start off just with like a simple exercise. Just write down on these cards what your brand stands for. What is the official positioning? What is it all about? So they all filled out the little cards, and they sealed them, and they gave them to me. And I'm in this fancy room in Midtown. And I said, great. And I opened each one, and I just started to write the words on the board. And we got, in a room of 10 executives, we got about 48 different words. And, not just, similes, completely different words. And so I got to 48, and I said, so here's the problem, guys. You don't fucking know what your brand stands for inside the leadership team. And I pointed to the beautiful window looking out over the rest of New York City. I'm like, there's no chance that any of those people out there are going to have a clue. Yeah. And that's a typical story of bad brand management. The company themselves can't articulate consistently what they want the brand to stand for. And in my life, whenever I work for very big brands, very complicated brands, 4 or 5 words or concepts, I don't care what you call it, that's what positioning is. It's we want when the consumer thinks about our brand, first of all, more important than positioning, it has to come to mind. And then we want them to think this, right? It takes skill and training and power and capability to position a brand on 3 things. Any moron can do it in 50 words and fail.
I do an exercise. I want you to tell me if you think it's similar to what you just took those executives with. Henry's heard me talk about this. I call it the Albert Einstein challenge. Albert Einstein is famous. Well, some people say he didn't actually say this, but I give him credit for having said, if you can't explain it to a child, you don't understand it yourself. Yeah. So then I say, okay, now let's take the word it out of that. And I want you to explain your brand as if you're talking to a child. Here's a catch. Don't tell me what your product is, explain your brand. So for example, if I were to ask you to explain the Chicago Bulls, which is a basketball team, you can't say, oh, it's a basketball team, because that's the product. So tell me explain the brand of the Chicago Bulls. When I do this with people in my workshops, it stops them cold. They are very good at describing their category or their product, but they cannot explain their brand.
Well, and it's a great point. It's a great point. Von Clausewitz is probably the great non-cliched strategic writer, right? And Von Clausewitz used to say, strategy is simple, but that does not mean it's easy. And how that translates to our world is, if you deal with a proper, good marketing strategist, a CMO, she or he have worked on this for 9 months. They've thought about it in the shower. I have a couple that will ring me up and just run something by me, and they're just kind of running it and squeezing it and squeezing it. And then by the time they're finished, they produce a strategy, including positioning, but also targeting objectives, that's so simple, their team gives them the ultimate compliment, which is, yeah, this is great, but it's kind of common sense, right? And that's the genius of complex strategy with a simple outcome. Well, I used to teach at MIT. Like I won the teaching prize there, right, when I was a visitor, which is pretty rare. And the students came up to me after my first ever brand management class, and they said, look, this is a great class, but it's kind of common sense compared to some of our other classes. And I said, no, it's not. It's just that the other professors aren't as good as me. I could have made this so complicated, none of you would have understood it, and I would have looked clever. But I figured that's kind of not my job here, right? My job was to make it common sense for you. And it's the same with strategy. The job of great strategy, to your analogy, Howard, is to be able to create something that's so simple, the team say, look, this is obvious, and you can say, good, go and do it then. Yeah? We've all worked for lots of shit companies and shit bosses who don't think enough, aren't smart enough, and produce a strategy so complex, you need McKinsey in a 12-deck presentation to understand it.
Well, see, Mark, you would never succeed in a literature department at any university in this country, because you would be expected to speak in such obscure language that only other professors would pretend to know what you're talking about.
Hey, look, I've lived that, Howard. I have PhD students, right, who I love dearly, who I supervised, who have written papers at the end of our work together on their thesis, which I am like, I have no fucking clue what this means. And yet they've gone and published that paper with great acclaim. And to this day, I'm like, it was my original idea. It was my supervision. I still have no clue what 7 of these pages actually mean.
Well, that's a key reason why neither of my books on the brief would ever be accepted by traditional professors of advertising and marketing. Adjuncts who are former, agency employees who teach on the side, they'll use the books because they know what the real world is like.
Okay, let's go there. I've been a tenure track professor, right? I've worked at proper universities. Let me be very honest about that. Then let's go. My dad, who's a very simple man, I work at a lot of medical companies, and we have these KOLs, key opinion leaders. Whenever I was working with a big medical company, and they would be like a professor of surgery at NYU or somewhere, And the professor, I used to ask people this all the time. I'd say, guess what a professor of surgery at NYU does if you're a professor of surgery? And people say they teach and they do research. I'm like, yeah. They do a lot of fucking surgery, is what they do, right? And then they teach surgery as well. Why is it? How is it that in almost every top 10 marketing department in the United States of America, the professors don't do any fucking marketing who are professors of marketing? They've never done any marketing. They've never worked in the job before taking the role, and afterwards they don't do any consulting. They just give occasional talks. It's a fucking disgrace. And these people are nice, bright, lovely people. You go and look at, have a look at the University of Chicago's marketing department, right? One of the best business schools in the world. Not only have these guys never worked in marketing, not only have these guys not really done any consulting in marketing, not only do they not have a degree in marketing, they don't have a PhD in marketing. They have a PhD in something else, in quantitative science or economics, right? The sadness of the great American business schools, the places that produce people like Ted Levitt and Paul Green and the titans of marketing a generation ago, is they're now staffed by people that have no clue about the thing they're teaching, not because they're not bright, not because they're not good people, but because it's a functional job. We're just plumbers. Imagine teaching plumbing and you'd never laid a pipe in your life. Good fucking luck with that. Well, that's what they're doing in all the top business schools, right? Yeah. When I got to MIT, right, this would be 10 years ago, I got to MIT and I was kind of nervous. I hadn't taught in a top business school for a while. And my wife and I went over there, and I went in the classroom the first week. I taught core marketing. That was what I was brought in to do. Not 70 MBAs, first marketing class. And I came back that night. My wife said, "Well, how did it go then?" And I said, "Fuck, I don't fucking know." I said, "I've taught a lot of classes in my time. There was a weird vibe in that class, man. It was a strange one." So I went back on the Thursday for the second class, and I had a class of 70, and there were 140 people in the room sitting on the windowsills and stuff because word had got out. This fucker's actually done marketing. And they all turned up for the class. See what I mean? That's the state of American business school education, right? It's a shame that it's got that level, but that's where we are. And we needed the American business schools in the decade we've just had, back to Henry's point about digital marketing. We needed them to be on the game, and they were just fucking, completely up their own orifices, completely outside of the conversation. Which American professors are having an impact now? Galloway doesn't count. He's not a real professor. Like Galloway's adjunct, right? Brilliant as he is, he's not a PhD that came through the tracks. Where are the great marketing thinkers of academia? They're not in America, right? It's Byron Sharp, yeah, who's based in Australia and who's a Kiwi, right? Who has had 100 times more impact than all the business schools of America in the last 10 years in marketing combined. It's an incredible scandal that this is going on when America is the home or was the home of great marketing.
I can't agree with you more, Mark. I want to finish with one. Out of respect for your time, I want to finish with one last big topic and also close out with another anecdote. So we kind of tiptoed around it. We mentioned the word purpose, but it was in the discussion about positioning. And of course, brand purpose has become like this thing. And what we're talking about isn't like a brand's true purpose, like, serve family friendly meals, but rather how brands are supposedly saving the world. And I know that you have some opinions on some of these brands that are going after like these really absurd brand purpose statements that go far beyond like any reasonable reading of like what that brand or that company actually does for a consumer.
And now, Mark, just to let you know, you've been holding back on us, so don't hold back when you're answering this. Okay?
Well, look, so I'll preface it by saying, look, first of all, brand purpose is a strategy, yeah? And strategy is choice. So there are companies that will make the right choice to either adopt a brand purpose as their positioning or not. Where I have a real problem is with the purpose selling people that say, without brand purpose, your brand will fail, yeah? Without brand purpose, you cannot succeed. That's just nonsense. Most brands don't need brand purpose, right? And so there's a couple of problems with the whole purpose nonsense that we can't talk about in America, because if you said this, like, people would throw themselves out of windows, They're so fucking ideological about it. So first, the premise of branding, let's not forget, is mostly built on salience and just brute awareness. So your main job, and if you put a bullshit number on it, I'd say 75% of the job of brand and brand management is to make sure your brand comes to mind. Okay, it's got nothing to do with what it stands for, brand image. That's a minority thing, right? So first, don't forget that salience is the main thing, and that doesn't matter. Purpose doesn't matter. Second, even for the smaller proportion of the brand image that matters, is a purpose really so important to customers? Is it something that differentiates you? Is it something that you actually deliver upon? These are questions that no one asks, right? It's an opportunity cost if you choose to position on brand purpose. And I'll tell you right now, we're in an interesting place. We're going into a recession in most countries. We've got this bullshit research where we say to someone, hey, if a brand stood up for your values and looked after the planet, would you buy that one over the other one? Yes, everyone says. Of course they do. They don't want to look like a wanker filling out a survey. But when it comes to where they spend their money, their actual behavior versus their spoken recollection of their behavior, we see a very different thing. So I'd be very skeptical right now of many of the brands that are pushing the purpose agenda because A, they're not delivering on it properly. B, customers don't really care about it in many sectors. And what's going to happen is, of course, the opportunity cost of pushing a very generic brand purpose that isn't important to customers is that those brands that position on a proper customer-based value platform will have a stronger, and on salience, will have a much stronger impact. And the case study to watch is Unilever, right? So Unilever have been very purpose-driven, most purpose-driven consumer goods company in the world. And again, it's not a complete story here. For some of their brands, Dove, the purpose position is perfectly valid and the right one to play. Customers care about, the real value of beauty. It's differentiating versus a lot of these fake bullshit beauty companies, and Dove delivers on it brilliantly. Success.
100% agree.
Yeah, it's a brilliant story, right? But Unilever has 45, 50 other brands, Hellmann's mayonnaise, that are trying to position on, use Hellmann's mayonnaise and reduce landfill. What? Or pot noodle. Like they're looking for a brand purpose for pot noodle and for ice cream, and so it's an ideology. And so beware anyone that says brand purpose is always wrong. It's not. And anyone that says without brand purpose you'll always fail, you won't. It's a strategic choice. And like anything else, sometimes you should make the choice and sometimes you shouldn't. But you first need to understand and have a proper strategy in place. No surprise, we don't have CMOs that do that. They just go, oh, I must have a brand purpose because everyone has a brand purpose. Here is my brand purpose. And off we go on the carousel of bullshit once again.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts occur to me. One is having just come back, or a couple months ago from Cannes, Mark Pritchard was there, and he gave a speech where he was kind of walking back a little bit away from the brand purpose, and he was talking about growth. We need to be about growth. We can.
I remember that.
When
I remember it very clearly, Henry. I think Mark Pritchard's a very smart operator. I think he's a very clever guy, and he's got the success, right? And I think his point was, we have to have a conscience about what's going on, and we have to achieve growth, but growth above the consciousness of it. We don't have to trade them off, but growth is our priority. I thought it was very well said, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, it doesn't mean, when I say don't have a purpose statement or whatever, it doesn't mean I think we should rape the planet or treat animals despicably or treat any part of our employee base in a non-optimal way. It's just I'm not going to focus on that as my appeal to the customer. That's the point, right? That's the point. A lot of these purpose junkies will portray you as being, oh, what, you just care about money. It's like, no. I think companies should operate in an extremely responsible fashion. But when I lay down my chips, ethical, responsible,
but that doesn't have to be your positioning. And which brings me to the other point I was going to say. I wrote a piece on LinkedIn a few years ago about this exact problem, and I said, look, there are companies like Tom's Shoes, right? You buy a pair of shoes goes to somebody who doesn't have one. that is a company that's built, organized, and consumers love that about Tom's shoes. The problem is when you have every Tom, Dick, and Harry masquerading as a company that has a brand purpose, consumers get jaded. And who loses out there? The real companies that have a purpose now just are with, pissing in the wind, because everybody's put on this cloak, just like green being green. Everybody's green. Well, how do you know who's really green?
And it goes even further, right? If you take Tom's shoes or you take Oliver Wiley, here's the key point in all of this that no one talks about. The reason people buy Tom's shoes is they like the shoes. It's great that Tom's shoes also donates a pair to someone who needs shoes. Awesome. It's not the main reason that people are buying their shoes. Oliver Wiley, the founder of Oliver Wiley, said something a couple of years ago where he's like, we did it initially as our main, purpose was to you buy spectacles for people who can't afford spectacles with your spectacle. We now know from our research, people like that, but that's not the reason. They're buying because of fit, because of look, because of price. But we're going to keep doing this because we think it's the right thing to do. But it's not why we're successful.
But at least they can claim somewhat of a positioning there, and it is part of their brand DNA to some degree.
It is, Henry. But here's the point about purpose. Which idiot said it had to generate a fucking profit? Right? That childish schoolboy necessity to say purpose will make you more money. What? No. The point of purpose is purpose. In fact, there's a strong argument purpose should cost you money, and you're doing it not because it makes you a profit, but because you believe in it in the first place. At some point, a bunch of marketing morons said purpose will make us money. It won't.
I think that's what they say. I think that's what they say to their CFOs, but I don't think they believe that. I think that they like to go to the cocktail parties and they don't want to be associated as a money-grubbing capitalist.
But do we know?
I think that's it. It's become uncool. It's become non-trendy to make a good product, sell it at a good price, employ people.
Could you imagine somebody more uncool than the CMO of Walmart? I mean, if you walked into a cocktail party in Manhattan and said, "I'm the CMO of Walmart."
Yeah. Oh, I mean, you're making coffee, you're making sugared beverages. What a terrible admission, right? Because there is a sense of what are we doing here? But yeah, I think it's an American problem. It's less widespread elsewhere. There's become a sense of shame about making a good product at a good price, employing people at a fair wage, turning the wheels of economy, and not destroying the planet by doing it, not hurting anyone, but running a good business. That I do like Musk on a lot of topics. Elon Musk is very clear. Our purpose is to make a profit. Our purpose is to employ people. Our purpose also is to move everyone to a solar-powered future. But fundamentally, the purpose of a business is to be profitable and sustainable in every sense of the word. So
make money for the owners of the shareholders, and ideally in an ethical way. I mean, Howard,
and a sustainable business model that has a future for the business as well as for the planet. And we're on two extremes of either, we're arch capitalists who hate purpose, or we're purpose-driven non-capitalists. There is a middle ground that's possible, but purpose should cost you something.
I like your thinking on that, Mark. And I think what the fundamental problem here is that ideology gets in the way of clear thinking.
Yeah.
When people have an orthodoxy, they have a tendency to ignore facts because it conflicts with their worldview. And this is an example of that. It's not all purpose will do X, or no purpose will do Y. It's sometimes it works. And now can we say, do you know, because I don't know, has Dove, as one of those products, one of those brands, has Dove benefited financially from its purpose?
Massively.
No doubt. Yes. That's like the case like you could make, that was a brand that was a legacy brand, a brand that was going nowhere. And that campaign, Dove Real Beauty, put Dove back on the map. It's a major player now. But the on the flip side of that is Old Spice, right? they were an old flailing brand, and they didn't do a brand purpose play. They went for something else. They had a different
creativity,
and so those are two packaged goods, in related industry, in grooming and beauty, and they took two different approaches, and both approaches work. So back to Mark's point, it's a choice.
Yeah.
Purpose is a choice, and
it's a choice.
If the mayonnaise brand can find a way to bust through financially by having some purpose, well, good on them, right? But if they can't, it seems like a major stretch for a mayonnaise brand to do that.
For a lot of brands, it's a stretch. It's
exactly
grafting on some
patina artificial
patina of philanthropy to
but what happens, boys, is this is a function again of that strategy thing we talked about earlier. So if you go through a proper diagnosis, if you then build a proper strategy, it's kind of infallible. You'll work out what's the right approach. What we're seeing with a lot of brands is they don't have that capability in the team to do proper research, build a proper segmentation, have that complex discussion about mass targeting, target segments, positioning, objective setting doesn't happen anymore. You get that in place, you instantly know what's the right avenue to go down because your strategy is guiding you. What we're seeing with purpose, being bolted on, is that process of marketing isn't there. So what we get instead is just jumping at things superficially and doing them poorly as a result. And it's a function of this inability to do fundamental marketing properly.
So thank you so much, Mark, for being with us. I wanted to leave with one anecdote. So I mentioned I was in the first cohort for the mini MBA in marketing. And then when you came out with a mini MBA in brand management, I also wanted to be in that first cohort. I signed up right away and was on it. At the time, I had just started working in my current role as vice president of strategy at an agency here in Miami. And I was also teaching a class in advertising strategy at the University of Miami. And I was taking your course. And my wife had a brain aneurysm. And my life got turned upside down. I missed a couple of weeks of class at the university. I was at the hospital. It was a nightmare. And the deadline for the simulation, which is the final project, came and went. And I reached out to you and I said, Mark, I've got this problem. This is what happened. If you could reopen the training, the simulation for me, I'll, just cram it and do it. And you wrote back, said, oh, no, don't do that. Just join us in the next cohort. No worries, no problem. And I was able to do that. Took the course again, soup to nuts, and got an A. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
Henry, it was my pleasure. I can remember you in the user group. So we have a pretty good debate, during the class. And you were always such a great contributor and you were respectful, but you were also pointed about your points. So we were, and I remember you sending me the message and thinking, look, dude, don't we? You've got more important things than brand management. But all credit to you, you came back the following class and you smashed my simulation. I think you did pretty well.
I did pretty good. I surprised myself how well I did, but then I saw there's the outliers, like the people that did amazingly well, like they just it's crazy. But I was very happy with the grade.
We should explain what happens is we do the 10 weeks of the course and you build a brand plan and then you run it in a 5-year simulation and your share price is your grade. And Henry did very well. We only give out 20% of the class get an A, so Henry did very well. But there's a few spooks who literally pull the thing apart and just do incredibly well. And again, back to our point about confidence, they're often the people that really doubt themselves until they go through this process and they go, holy, I can do this. I'm really good at this. They're often the ones that didn't think they were good at it, which is fascinating.
Well, Mark, Henry has told that story a couple of times, and I always enjoy hearing him tell that story because it speaks so well of you. So this has been a delight for me to meet you and to listen to you share your wisdom. Henry's been a huge supporter and advocate of you and your thinking, and I'm just grateful that you could join us on the Brief Brothers today. We appreciate it.
Yeah, boys, it was absolutely my pleasure. Stay in touch, and at some point we'll get some drinks in some American. I mean, Miami sounds good to me. I have happy memories of getting shit faced in Miami. Let's do it in
Miami or Austin. Howard's in Austin. I'm in Miami, so whenever
Yeah,
you
I would come to Tasmania. I mean, I've never thought about Tasmania.
It's boring here. My wife might catch me. No. We'll do it in the States. I've had a drink in Austin before, but it's been it's a beautiful town. I have to say though, getting shit faced in Miami is a singularly wonderful thing. So I think we're going to do it in Miami, boys.
I'll be glad to be your host in degenerate
Sounds like
drinking.
a plan. Sounds like a plan.
South Beach, here we come.
Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach, and together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time.